Hey sketchy friends, this week I wanted to share with you a sketch I did of a landscape in West Cork. If you want to have a go at this sketch too, I have put a link to the photo reference in the description below, so please feel free to have a go at this as well. I am doing this sketch in my Sea White of Brighton watercolor travel sketchbook, the A5 size. And first of all, I'm just going through, I'm not sure if you can see this so well on camera, but I'm just going through and sketching out the big shapes in pencil. So I start with a sort of horizon line off there in the background at the base of those mountains and just kind of work from there. And I think I'm probably using a B pencil for this, an HB or a B. But I'm drawing reasonably lightly just so that the pencil lines don't end up in the final sketch too much. But to be honest with you, I use quite heavy watercolor style, quite bright as well as ink lines. So yeah, it's unlikely that the pencil will show through too much. If you're doing a more delicate watercolor sort of painting or sketch, you may want to use a sort of finer pencil and sketch much lighter. You may also want to erase some of the lines before you go on to doing the painting. Just make sure you be careful with erasing your pencil lines on the watercolor pencil and that you don't damage the surface of the paper. My favorite way around this for the last several years, I think, is using a kneaded eraser, one of those gray kneaded erasers, and they don't erase quite as well as like the hard white plastic erasers, but they don't seem to damage the paper either, so it's kind of a nice compromise. So the most important thing in this scene for me is to get the proportion of the road, the perspective of the road, and also the posts as well. So you can see here I'm starting to ink in the posts in the foreground, and I'm using quite a lot of detail and texture on them because they're right in the foreground. They're much bigger than the other posts in the scene, and therefore to show kind of some depth and a bit of perspective, things in the foreground are always a bit more clear, more textured, more detailed. I would also use the thicker pen line for them just to really bring them forward in the scene. And then to show also the way the road is curving round and round the corner is these posts as well. So they're going to get progressively smaller as we move back in the scene, and they curve around as well. So getting the details like this correct will really help that sense of being in the scene. It will show the depth and the perspective quite nicely. So I'm just using a uni pin fine liner for this, 0.2 I think, and they're great pens to draw with. They are waterproof, and yeah, it's a pen that I tend to use quite a lot, and they're a good price as well. You can get a set of them in various different sizes off of Amazon or your local art store or whatever, and they do last for quite a long time, so highly recommend those pens. I think they're actually my favourite, even though there's not a great deal between the different pen brands. I mean, I think the uni pens are sort of my favourite. I just feel most comfortable drawing with those ones. And here I'm getting out my trusty old White Nights watercolour set. I've got my size 10 Escoda Reserva travel brush, which is a natural hair brush, but you by no means need a brush like this to do a sketch like this. And I am trying to get that a bit of a moody sky in the background, so I'm using some indigo and just doing a bit of wet on wet, just trying to indicate some of those clouds and just generally a bit of a somber, moody atmosphere back there. And then I am painting in the road, and I'm doing so in a bit of a Payne's grey with perhaps a bit of quinadricone rose, and then I just put wet in wet a bit of Indian yellow in there just to sort of show perhaps a loose idea of where that yellow line is down the road. I don't know why I did that. I did it on a whim, and I just thought it might be fun. And then moving on to this grass bank on the left hand side, I'm first laying down a bit of Indian yellow, probably with a bit of green in there because it doesn't look like pure Indian yellow. And then I'm just wet in wet dabbing in a bit of green into the Indian yellow. Again, it's probably going to dissipate out a bit anyway, but I'm just trying to show some texture of the grass without really having to go in and sort of put any ink lines or very tight kind of lines in there to show grass. So this is, you know, explore wet and wet. It's like really quite a useful technique to, especially to show a bit of texture. And again, I really love these White Nights paints just because they're just so vibrant. I really enjoy using them. So here I'm just trying to use a slightly different tone of like a base layer. So I think it's more of an Indian gold rather than an Indian yellow, just to sort of show, I mean, that bank on the right is just a slightly different color going on there. So I just wanted to add a bit of variation. And, you know, I am going back in and dabbing in the Indian gold back into the green because it ends up sort of pushing the pigment away. So again, you end up with this nice like texture. And then the bank of grass I'm painting in the back is obviously further away and it's got more shadow on it. So I just want to try and make it a bit darker so that that front bank of grass, that hill, really kind of stands out against it. And obviously this is a stylized watercolor sketch. It's not realism or completely, you know, realistic. That's not really my style, as you guys know. So this is just kind of my interpretation of the scene in my kind of ink and watercolor style. And I'm using some of my favorite colors here from this set. I love the indigo, I love the Indian yellow and the Indian gold and the green. They're just, yeah, really strong favorites of mine in this White Night set. I wasn't too happy with the colour of this background mountain, to be honest. I wanted to make it a bit bluer to show it's like in the background, but I just mixed up the wrong shade, to be honest, and I should have tested it before I started painting on my paper, and I'm like, that's definitely not the colour I was going for, but, you know, it's fine. I'll stick with it, and it kind of works out all right in the end. And here I'm just sort of putting like a turquoisey kind of colour into the water. And now I'm painting in those front posts a kind of a brownish colour. And then the rest of the posts I'm putting shadow on the relevant side of the post, but I'm leaving them white as per the photograph. And I think that kind of negative space, kind of white space, like is really nice within this scene. And then putting in these shadows on the ground for where the posts are, that was really fun. So I'm just going in with a slightly darker Payne's grey, sort of indigo kind of mix. I think it's nice to try and stick with the same kind of colours for your sketch because it brings like a certain amount of cohesion. So reusing like indigo throughout the scene, so in the sky and in the shadows, it just like makes it all really tie together quite nicely. So I'm mindful in the background, I don't want to put too much detail because I don't want to bring it forward, you know, I just want to keep things kind of vague back there because obviously my road and these grassy verges are the foreground of my scene. But also I did want to put a bit of detail in the mountains in the back just to kind of actually show that they are like mountains. And so I'm just looking at the scene and I'm really just simplifying. I'm just painting in some shadow shapes in a slightly darker colour, and yeah, just to indicate that there is something going on back there. But yeah, just be a bit mindful not to put too much detail in the background. So I'm just adding a bit of detail into the sea, just I think there's some rocks back there. And then just adding some shadows and a bit of detail and texture, again, more towards the foreground, just to bring things forward a bit more, give them a bit more visual interest. And it's always a fine balance, really. So, you know, I kind of add a few things slowly and see how it goes. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that looks all right. I'll keep going. But there's always like a danger of like overworking things as well. So you don't want to go too crazy doing texture on all of the grassy bits because then it just becomes a bit too much. But if you can just do a suggestion, more detail in the foreground and then a bit of a suggestion in the middle ground and then even less of a suggestion in the background, if that makes sense, then that's kind of the way to think about it. And then also just adding in shadows, you know, that's a really important part of things, just to make sure your contrast is there and that it gives it a bit more of a three-dimensional look. I'm just adding a few tiny little details in with the white gel pen, just to suggest a bit of the water breaking on those rocks there, but not too much. And that's pretty much my finished sketch. So I think all in all, that probably took me maybe 45 minutes or so. I just think it's like a really striking scene, but it's not too complicated. So I think this is a really good one to practice with, guys. I hope you enjoy having a go at this. Again, the reference photo is in the description below. Do check out Patreon, guys. I do theme of the month. I do a different theme each month, and I do weekly demos within that theme, and we look at all different kinds of sketches and different techniques and different types of mediums and just all kinds of things, and we're all learning so much together over there. So if you want more sketchbook inspiration, things to try out, do join me over there. Otherwise, I shall see you in my next video.